Welcome to Sacred, the podcast that invites you to reclaim your intuition, resist exploitive systems, and remember the love that brought you to teaching and caregiving in the first place.
We're your hosts,
Angela Carolina Garcia
and Lauren Stubble. Join us on a rough and tumble journey of reckoning and transformation. Hi, everyone. For this episode, we're talking with my teacher, Patty Townsend. She's a mother of 4, and I believe she's a grandma too. She's the founder of Embody Yoga, and you all have heard us talk about embodiment and practicing that. So this is where I learned it from, everybody. And she's also obviously a longtime yoga practitioner. So before we get started in our conversation with Patty, let's get grounded. So if you're in a place where you can sit, feel your seat underneath you, maybe place your feet on the floor. And if it's safe to close your eyes or look down, you can do that. And first, just give yourself a moment to arrive wherever you just sat or are sitting. And maybe in a different way than you did when you started to play this podcast, or the 3 of us sat down to start recording. For yourself to arrive. And then if you're still arriving, take as much time as you want. If you'd like to take a mindful breath in, feel a breath coming into the body, and then exhale out. On the next inhale in, I'm going to invite you to pause at the top of your inhale, just to notice that space between the inhale and the exhale. And as you're ready, exhale all the way to empty. Again, noticing that space at the bottom of the exhale, and then inhaling. And if that feels good, take a few rounds. If it doesn't, let it go. And then maybe now, with this next inhale and that pause in between, you might notice something that comes up for you. It might be an urge to grab your cell phone. It might be an urge to go do something different. Whatever, if there's an urge there, I want to invite you to be present with it, allow it to be in that space, and then continue with the breath. And then as you're moving with the breath, each time you get to that pause, that space, maybe there's room for something else now. Maybe it's the voice of your ancestors. Maybe it's your higher power speaking to you. Maybe it's just nothingness. Whatever is coming for you, whether it's the urge or something different, just let it be, make space for it. And then as you're ready, coming back into this shared space, this sacred podcast space. If your eyes are closed or lowered, you can start to look up, maybe look around your space. If there's anybody in your space, you might make eye contact and smile. And then we will begin our conversation with you, Patty Townsend. Thank you so much for coming and spending this time with us. These topics are, I honestly think of you with all of these topics. It seems like these that we're diving into in season 2 are really things that you teach about. But first, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your journey, kind of maybe what makes you the you are today?
Oh, boy. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. My journey, wow, and who I am today. First of all, I'm not very different from who I was as a baby. I'm now noticing that kernel of who was always there is still there on the individual level. And I'm very, very aware of that. I'm also aware that it's been a lot of study. It's been a lot of dedication that I've put into my life and fortitude. I like to give myself credit for that at this point in my life. That's very new for me to be able to say, yeah, wow, you did a lot of work here, which I did. And never was it for any kind of, reason to be recognized for it. It was always a personal study. And becoming a teacher was the most tremendous of gifts for me, because what I realized was teaching turned out to be the way to deepen my humanity and to deepen my relationship to self. Little did I know that was the journey that it turned out to be on, because as a yoga teacher, I was really very, very early. I'm 72 now. I started all of this when I was 16. So very early in those first, I don't know, maybe the first decade, I just wanted to be perfect. I really wanted, I didn't know what it was, but I thought probably somebody could do it. And yoga seemed to offer, oh yeah, you could be perfect. You can transcend life and everything and never have a bad thing in your body or your mind. I thought, okay, good. I'm on for that, And then, as I said, becoming a teacher and coming to terms with what is actually real in life. As you said, for children, you can pretty much give up being perfect or wanting to be perfect right around the time you start thinking about even dealing with a child. Right? And it was a great gift, and it's been a great gift, the whole journey to, as I said, take the path of yoga. It is yoga for me, into a more, what I would refer to as the feminine aspect, more into the realm of nature, where nothing is perfect and everything is beautiful and everything is rich and everything is flawed. Everything is breathing, being born, and dying. You just look at the forest floor and you see chaotic death. And out of it, you see rising little whispers of newness, or trees that are, now ancient and look kind of haggard, right? So that's that's who I am.
Thank you.
Wow.
I see you thinking, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, there's a lot of resonance with becoming a teacher or the study of becoming something. And then recently I've like, wait, why did I do all of that? Why am I doing that? Am I just institutionalizing myself in a system that has done a lot of damage? But then hearing you speak, like being on this other side after a lot of practice, I'm like, oh, we're practicing. And it feels really, really good. One of my uncles always says, Angela, you just go too deep with everything. We just need to talk about like this moment right now. And my dad is also very similar, but my uncle said it to me recently. And I said something like, I think I needed to study to learn to be in relationship with my family, not necessarily to be in relationship with young children or with the world, but definitely to keep in relationship with my family. And it makes me think a little bit of like, oh, nature sort of pushes us into really observing how lineage like composts and rebirths and composts and rebirth. So I was sitting with that in that moment of contemplation that Lauren noticed.
Ooh, I love that. Composting and lineage. Okay, thank you for that. Actually, that I feel like that leads us right into our first topic, which, Patty, feel free to answer these questions directly or just as your thoughts lead the way, or heart. How might we sense into ancestral knowledge rather than reinforce survival mechanisms that no longer serve us? And the follow-up to that is kind of, how do we distinguish between an urge to survive and a move to thrive? What comes up for you in the context of ancestral knowledge?
Well, again, for me, it's been a long process in terms of ancestral knowledge, a long process being a white American woman. I pretty much thought I just didn't have any ancestral knowledge. You know, it's just all cities and I don't know, whatever. And then I started to think a little bit more deeply about it, and specifically my mother, who was a complicated person. I'm sure everyone's mother was a complicated person. And my grandmother on my maternal side. And now being able to watch this particular lineage in my daughter and her daughter. So the feminine lineage. And as I've matured, I find myself much more often really respecting my grandmother and the wisdom that she didn't really say to me too often, but I felt even in her funny, silly little blue hair and bangles and her martini in the evening, you know, even that, she had a depth of something that she offered to me. On her, I was, you know, obsessively trying to perfect myself in the year when she died. And she said to my mother on her deathbed, they used to call me Patty Sue because my mother's name was Patty. Some people still call me Patty Sue. She said, "Tell Patty Sue not to eat so many bananas." Right? What she meant was, ease up on this diet stuff. Up. And I took this knowledge to be not just about what I was eating, but about the whole path. I understood what she was saying, and I understood that it was on the day she died, she said it. Yeah. So that's what occurs to me. That's about as far as I can go with ancestors, because I feel so inculcated into this, you know, this Western privileged environment that I've always lived in. And I actually feel that that's one of the gifts that is mine. One of the gifts that is mine is that I can speak to that with knowledge from that. Like, what are we doing, guys? I've been a yoga teacher now for 50 years. And I've watched from the very beginning where we all of us just bought into the hierarchical patriarchy of the whole game, and we're going to be the best at it, and then we're going to be the studio owners, and then we're going to be the experts, and then everybody's going to look at us and say how great we are, rather than the wisdom to thrive, which needs to have the need for that separate recognition to go away, but to recognize the whole as like the forest, the growing of, okay, women are here now. What can we do? We can do this differently. And I find that even today, shockingly to me, even today, it continues in the yoga world, that we, the women, are largely still trying to win at the male game of the hierarchy and the patriarchy and the whole thing. We just want to be on top.
Hmm.
That's not going to change anything.
I was in a class once, and the person who was leading the class, I don't think that you know her, Patty, but some of us were chatting, and it seemed like the right time to do so. But she was like, "Listen to me, I'm the guru now." I was like,
Oh,
I gotta get out of here.
but wait a minute. That's something I would say as a joke.
I see. She wasn't joking, unfortunately.
It's terrible.
But that's like an example of how, like, even we're taking yoga, which is for spiritual liberation, right? And somehow we're trying to like jam it into this capitalist context. And so I've always felt like in offering classes of like, well, how do I offer this and, feed myself at the same time? And
Oh, yeah,
it's a bit of a dance, right? And
absolutely.
so that did resonate with me, and I did appreciate how you mentioned like that there is that those systems, right, that exist that we might have an urge to try to survive within, and but really what we feel in our hearts is like that's not me. And I was just thinking the other day of like, wow, we're running on this hamster wheel. We're like, geez, I wish this would stop. And we look down and it's our own feet like moving
Mm.
the hamster wheel. And I've felt we keep talking about mycelium of mushrooms that also in the forest floor, right? We keep learning about all of these things happening all over maybe all over the world, Angela,
Mhm.
that are this shift to, what is actually healing for us? What is the place where we feel most human? And even men don't want to be doing the patriarchy thing. Like they are also moving the hamster wheel with their feet. A lot of the men I know, not all of them, of course. But it's interesting that I, thinking of it, even in the yoga context, is interesting for me to think about how that has played out in my life. But your classes have always felt like the forest floor, I would say, in that um, I started going to your class in the most one of the most difficult times of my life, right after divorce, and um, but I kept going because it was very grounding to go and do. We were doing the same postures every week still, and that was an hour and 45-minute class, and it felt so good to just move. And you were real. You were not like pretending anything, and you invited us to feel what you're doing as you're doing it, right? And imagine, notice, feel. So even if you can't feel that, imagine that you could. Like, wow, thank you for opening that possibility because sometimes, and Angela keeps talking about imagination being part of making a shift to something new or remembering something. Because if we can't feel it or we're disconnected from our ancestors, then maybe we just need to start by imagining our ancestors, and see what comes up.
I'm I'm a little bit curious, Patty, if you could I maybe talk a little bit about what were some of the messages that your body was sort of giving you in this moment of we're here, we're women, we want to make this thing happen, we want to get recognized, and then shifting towards no, like masculinity energy is very different from feminine energy, and choosing to tap into it sounds like the feminine energy. But what were like if we can like stretch that out a little bit, I would really love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah. Um, the the feelings in my body in that time before the stretching out,
Mm,
before, but
mm,
I'm really good at this, mind. I got this. Not only have I got it, people really admire me for it. And that it
mm.
has been my goal. So I got it. Right. It was a very, it was, as am saying it, you feel the locked inness of that. And that was my
Mm.
body, my
And for
body.
the listeners, Patty just moved her hands flat, one on top of the other one, like a line, and then she made two fists. So just so you can get
Yes.
the feel.
My body felt um, it's a funny thing to say tight, because according to anybody who would look at me, everybody would talk about how flexible I was. Well, that was not true. My experience of self was tight. It was controlling. It was about surviving, right? This is how I'm going to survive. I'm going to survive because I'm going to be really good at this game, whatever game I decide to play. I'm going to win the game, right? And then I became very dissatisfied with that. And it was a long period of dissatisfaction where I just didn't know what else to do. I kept doing it, and as you said, Lauren, I still had to put money in the bank, and kept having children, all this time. And my husband and I were both working, and I needed to make a living. So I basically kept with all of that. But as you noted, Lauren, because you came in a very early time of that, I let go of most of the pretending, and that already softened me. I didn't know where I was going to go with it. What happened for me, Angela, is that I felt unmoored. I felt afraid. I felt I didn't know what I was going to do. I felt this wasn't right because this was too vulnerable and too open. And that thing I knew how to do, and I had learned how to win. And because I had a spiritual context for the whole thing, I also knew that the only thing I could do if I wanted to grow was to enter that space of not knowing and give up the control that I had chosen to have. Then I met my teacher, my teacher the last 30 years now, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, who is a brilliant person of embodiment. In fact, I would say that she's probably one of the very first real seeds of the incredible embodiment practices and somatics and allowing and all of what we're all doing. She's original. And I met her and I saw, wow, okay, here's an American woman who's telling me that the mess is absolutely beautiful. And she's not telling me as an idea. She embodied it. It was real for her. And she has 3 children. And there were all kinds of, complexities there. And I opened to the possibility. And I've always thanked her for holding that possibility as a teacher, because you know what? We need teachers. And one of the things we need teachers for, you mentioned imagination. We need teachers to tell us maybe so. The imagination to become different. And it was, I will say for me, it was painful. It was. And the results are so satisfying, and they continue to grow, of course. And of course, I'm not saying I'm happy. Yes, I have spontaneous moments of joy, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm messy, messy, all of it.
It's a very different movement than the one that you did at the beginning. So Patty was just like rolling her shoulders around and a bit of side to side swaying motion for the listener. Yeah.
It feels more real, And then over the time, turning as I hear you are too, turning my gaze to nature more and more and seeing, yeah, that's it. That's what's happening. We are part of that.
makes me think of like, did we talk about this here, Angela, about the trees as ancestors? And we're gonna be talking to somebody else this season. Actually, I just realized that we might consider the trees as ancestors sharing their knowledge with us if only we listen, right? So there is this a different way of, and even I love the way that you talk about Bonnie. It sounds like the way that you talk about her teachings is also like ancestral wisdom, or like sometimes our lineage isn't quite it. Like some of my students are like, when I ask them about how their ancestors are with them today, some of them are like, I really don't care. I don't, I don't want to have anything to do with those people. Because like
Uh-huh.
some people really embrace that question and have a lot to positive things to say. But right, we all have this, even like our orientation in the world is matters to how who our ancestors and how we hear them or don't hear, hear from
Mm.
You mentioned lineage, and I do think in terms of lineage, and I do feel that I have a very deep, clear lineage, and it does go beyond, certainly beyond my family.
them.
Yeah.
Is there anything about, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Is there anything about in terms of like the discernment process, your relationship with lineage that helps you navigate like the discernment between urge to survive and the move to thrive?
Well, discernment is an extremely important aspect of yoga practice. So I take it very seriously.
Mm,
I certainly don't accept just because I studied with someone, they're not part of my lineage.
mm,
The lineage comes when one, for me, when one takes from things I've learned in my deep, long life. I mean, my father was probably my first really powerful teacher. And then there were others, and then there were more, and there were those that I ended up not paying too much attention to, but they were useful. But there's a lineage that goes back through my lifetime that I recognize for sure. Very powerful. Ah, this feeds into this. So it's like checking things against one another.
mm,
If there's a truth here, if it's really a truth, and you got one coming up here that you think is truth, it better agree. Because if it doesn't, something is off.
mm,
So the lineage for me gets formed from the kernels and how they weave together.
mm,
Mm.
I think lineage is extremely important, and so I'm seeing now that that's how I relate to ancestors.
mm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm I'm thinking a little bit about like lineage and like the way that we are educated, quote unquote, the way that we go through school systems, the way that we go through university processes, um, even like certification processes, and and then there's like something, and it's really happening in this moment right now in my life actually, where I'm like, wait, like I just invested all of those years in my university studies, and now I'm a little bit like, I don't think they're serving me, so how do I let them go? And the motions you were making of like connecting those lineages and like how it's rooting into something like much younger in me that I'm like embracing and pulling up. So I'm thinking of like institutionalization and capitalism, and then how in self-reflection and embodiment and like burnt outness you begin to like let those things go, but then it like takes you to, if we allow ourselves, I suppose it takes us back to like our younger selves. And earlier you said like, oh, I've gone back to my youngest self. I think that's how I interpreted like you're in this older age, but you're very connected to your younger self. um I think that's how you said it. um but I'm wondering if if you can talk a little bit more about what that feels like to you as a white American woman. I see it very differently as a Latina woman who's moved around many different places. So I'm wondering a little bit more about that for you, or that process for you of like letting go of the system to make something different or new for yourself.
Well, like all good white women right now, hopefully we are learning. Being 72, being born in 1952,
Mm.
you get it. The gender roles, the race roles, everything were very, very hard and fast. So I've had a tremendous amount to do in terms of even being able to see my own biases.
Mm.
And I know that I continue to have more to do, but it's been revelatory and has changed how I think about everything. And I will say also, as part of the lineage, I think, because it's also brought this opening up of what, this too? I was duped.
Mm.
I was duped.
Mhm.
And I'm still duped. I'm still oh no.
Yeah.
I certainly not blame. I'm not blaming myself. What was I to do about it? Or what am I to do about it except to open to the new world? And that's, of course, that's only part of the new world. For me, the new world is also what is being uncovered by all of the aspects of allowing myself to see who I actually am. Because if one doesn't allow oneself to see who one actually is, you will not see deeply. You just won't. So it's a full inner and outer process that I know that we're all going through together. I'm not sure I answered anything there, but that was, yeah, where it
It
took.
makes me think of what both of you are saying is making me think of a conversation I had recently in the healing centered education space. And we were in a breakout room and it all kind of came up for the three of us. We're thinking about like our previous selves or like working to become a better self or, this constant, as long as I'm still looking, I'm facing the person I want to become, then I don't have to reckon with the person I was. But
Or am.
Exactly. Yes. That's exactly where we landed. Because we were like, wait, that is me. She's me back there. She's me right now. She's me out in front of me. I am all of those people now. I'm all of those people now. And so all three of us were just like, oh, okay. we okay. Can we hold space for all of us, all of me? Can I hold space for all of me? I think you even mentioned something like that in class this morning, Patty. But, can I hold space for, it was about emotions. Can we hold space for whatever, all the big emotions that come up for us. But that became our focus was like, well, okay, wow, how do I hold space to be this, I forget which word you used earlier, Patty, of something about like, complex being, all in this, like, without the temporal limitations of the clock, right?
It makes me like think of how like that's like the rough and tumble of between individualism and tapping into like we're not that great to hold all of ourselves.
I love that.
And so like we need to like, this is a very straightforward statement. So I'm sitting with that as I'm about to say it, but like we need to let ourselves be held by the earth.
Mm.
We need to let ourselves like to be like humble enough to be like, I cannot hold all those three versions of myself. I think of the three versions of myself, and I'm like, I was a bit of an asshole, actually. There's a part of me that is very much not very kind, and it's very cruel and be very straightforward. And it's like this checks and balances that exist in the diagram of my brain that I'm like, Angela, don't be that person. Like that, like we don't need to be that person. I don't need to be that person. But she very much comes alive when like injustice is happening, when violations have caused harm. And it's like, well, we're gonna battle it out. And no, we don't need to battle it out. That's actually the reaction or the response to fight back is actually something that's like something institutionalized that to be the response. That and so it's beyond the thing that has made me who I am is beyond me, and the thing to undo that is also beyond me. Is a little, yeah.
Ooh, thank you for that. I feel like that you're leading us right into the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do connecting with earth rhythms and caring for ourselves and each other help us in the processes of discernment?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You know, good discernment is not on the surface of the mind,
Mm,
right? Good discernment comes from that place of being able to hold all these aspects that we're talking about so that we're not in a state of inside, underneath our intellect. Oh, okay. I'm going to discern. I'm going to see that no, I figured that out. That's not discernment, right? So discernment, which is a spectacular thing, isn't it? To be able to actually discern. To discern, what do you have to do? You have to receive. Who's receiving? Hopefully not the who can't receive it anyway. Hopefully, one has cultivated inside of oneself a place that one has access to, maybe doesn't live in, but has access to, of quiet, where one can discern and notice what is actually happening rather than trying to categorize what's happening and say, oh, it's that. I've discerned it because I know 8 categories that fits into that one. Right? Like, oh no, there it is. It's that. It's that. And then in that calm space can come an action. I'm not saying an answer, that's for sure, but an action. And I think as educators and teachers and people who are called upon to discern, like, what do I say in this situation? As simple as that, what do I say? I think that it is imperative, maybe even imperative, that we cultivate that kind of space inside of ourselves so that we can make wise decisions. Because as long as we're just reacting in that way, we might happen on a wise decision, but I don't think it's very likely if it comes from a busy mind. I will say one thing more, if I may, that I think that also as educators and leaders, whatever we are, I mean, you're a leader if you're a mother, you're a leader if you're a partner, we're leaders, right? As leaders, we can't lead unless we have this space of clarity inside. And I will say, from my perspective, from my studies of yoga and philosophy and various different things over the years, mothering, parenting, my perspective is that we lead by showing that we contain this, that we are able to freaking hold it.
Mm.
You can be you, I can be me. I can handle you being you.
Mhm.
I can hold that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can make some decisions.
Mm.
Mm.
And I think people are attracted to that. So as a teacher, I know that I know from my own perspective of my own teaching that I became a more so-called powerful teacher. Yeah, powerful teacher. I'll own that as a thing to be. Um, when I stopped pretending anything.
Mm.
And when I allowed myself, because I didn't need to fool myself anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and to hold that space where there's nothing but that is really compelling to people. It's compelling to children too.
Mm-hmm.
They look
Mhm.
at you and they're just like, what? Really?
And then they'll test you a little bit to see if you're real. Seems like you can handle anything. Let's see about that.
Yes. And then so will your partner test you to see if it's
Yeah.
right, younger students, and they're ready. That's the game. Then
Yeah.
start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm 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 thinking about early childhood teachers right now, and I get to be in a space with lots of teachers or soon to be teachers that are predominantly immigrants, second language English learners or ESL students. And they are working many jobs on top of taking lots of college classes and probably getting paid $15 an hour. Um, Hopefully, they're getting paid $15 an hour because that's what the state says we should be paying them. Um, but I'm thinking a little bit when we're called to be the teachers, right? And then there's this like practice and the thing and the and like tapping into discernment and like right over the years of those practices. And I'm thinking a little bit about the conditions necessary to to sort of tap into each other as right, because we are the teachers and there are many of us, and how do we sort of tap into each other? I'm thinking like right now when we were just saying like you're the teacher and then the baby will test you and your partner will test you and the yoga student will test you, and we're all teachers and we're holding this space, and sometimes we hold it by ourselves and that's not sustainable, or that is exploitive. And so then we tap into each other, and I'm wondering like what are the conditions necessary, if they're necessary, to tap to create that cultivating space where we can be real despite all of this like stuff that's holding us as teachers down, or not me anymore but the teachers that I'm currently teaching. Wondering if there's some gifts you can give us in that sense for our listeners. um
Hmm. Hmm. The first thing is we need to feel safe, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And that's a big one. And I think that would be, that would be the place that I would go first is, do I feel safe to be myself? And if I'm myself in front of this group of people, what might happen?
Mm.
We have to deal with those questions, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it says it does say a lot where the container, we think about the container in our work, our consulting work a lot, but what is the container that holds us? Because we are, whether it's a container that we created or that something outside of us created, we're kind of still inside of that container in some way. And it could feel restrictive. And I'm always thinking about like your very rigid beginning and then moving into a more fluid space. Ooh, now I'm even thinking about the womb and like, right? Like, what does that feel like? It's warm, it's liquid, but there's an edge. There's a this
Mhm.
protective barrier around to do that kind of like ridiculously incredible development.
Mhm. Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
which does, I'm thinking about earth rhythms, but the kind of development that happens in the womb is so fast in my mind. It seems
Yeah.
so fast
Mhm.
that you start as cells and then you're just like a baby in 9 months. Um, but then there are these other earth rhythms that are like, I'm thinking about the container of a tree that's in the woods and the top of it was struck by lightning 25 years ago, but the inside's starting to be hollowed out. And like, this is a container also for some kind of new growth to be happening inside really different contexts of containers that may or may not feel safe to the people and the creatures and everything else inside. Well,
So I
maybe.
have a question for you.
Mm.
What is, I mean, I have my ideas, obviously. Um, what is thrive?
Jeff, this is great timing. Dr. Kia Hammond, Darling Hammond, is a new teacher for both of us, and she studies thriving. She studies thriving not in general, but for a specific group of people who are often left out of studies because it's a small percentage of a group of people, usually. But queer people of color, I don't remember if is it youth? I think it's also specifically youth. So she says the definition of thriving includes relationships with other people compared to like a definition of flourishing, which is more about an individual kind of. I don't think success is the right word, but I think you get what I'm saying. So thriving would be, and turns out this is what we were talking about. So I'm glad our intuition was aligned with the research that's happening. But thriving includes, right, people's ability to connect with others and feel like part of something. And maybe that's, I don't know, part of that container is an important ingredient there. He also said, which I thought was important for us, and I think kind of relates to your teachings, Patty, is that thriving is not a thing that we strive to achieve and then stay there.
Mhm.
We look for moments of thriving. Like
Mhm.
right now, I'm thriving. And then another day, I might not be.
Mhm.
But it doesn't mean I'm not going to be again. But kind of, I guess that's an earth rhythm too, and what it would look like in the context of thriving.
I'm
Well,
thinking.
thriving, in terms of, sorry, thriving also obviously includes growing, right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
It's inherent. And then you said one day I'm thriving, next day I'm not. And I would say to you that you are thriving even when you're thinking you're not,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
that is the way growth goes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like the composting that's
Yes, the compost.
necessary.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm thinking a little bit about my very recent like new way of living with my depression. And it makes me think of like it's just a part of who I am that I've sort of like resisted. Um, and as it got really worse, I happened to be in spaces with teachers um, that sort of reframed the concept of disability for me. And it makes me think of like when we think of life and full spectrum of life, it is not only living, it is also death, and like death in the context of you have to let go of that thing for the new thing to come. And so like to live with the disability versus it versus making yourself or forcing yourself to do the thing. But like no, like right now there's this thing that's heavy and it will eventually pass. So I think that part of thriving is also like not, I don't know if acceptance is the right word or if it's embracing, but so something of like that moment in the breath where like you take the breath in and then you hold that moment. I think of is what it sort of makes me think of what is thriving. Like you will eventually release the breath and then it'll happen again. Like those pauses in between is what I think of in regards to thriving. Like both things have to happen. It's not just one thing. And it's in relationship to like the other systems as well.
That is making me think about for listeners who have read Tiny Humans, Big Emotions, Patty is the teacher that I have quoted in that book in the mindfulness section. It's reminding me of, so we had asked Patty to read that section before we even submitted it for publication. And the comments that she left about judgment and what happens when judgment comes up were so powerful that I was like, can we use these as quotes in the mindfulness section? She said yes. So, but it's a teaching that I often share with my students too when we're talking about judgment, because you said it's not, and this is not a direct quote now, I'm going to do my best to remember, it's not the judgment itself that's a problem, it's believing it that's the problem. Right? So it's like, I feel like that is part of thriving is when, okay, I am a judging human, right? Like Angela, you said acceptance, right? Like, okay, I accept that is true about myself and all of us, right? So I don't need to try to make it go away, but I don't have to listen to that thought, right? Or like that's the discernment of like, okay, this thought happened. Is that a thing that I want to guide me, or is that a thing that I want to just put on the shelf or acknowledge or put on my list to talk about with my therapist, whatever it is, that that this is actually leading right, I think, into the next question, because the word play just popped out at me in the next question. This kind of feels like the rough and tumble play a little bit. But our question is, how do we remember, envision, cultivate, and play in a third space? I feel like we're just kind of like moving right into to that third space topic. What are your thoughts about a third space?
What is the third space?
Well, we'll ask you that question, actually. So this is up for interpretation. For me, when I think about a third space, it's like the space I never thought of. And I usually need other people to think with in order to discover it. Like, I really don't know how to find that by myself. Maybe if somebody knows how to do that, that is incredible. But I need other people to find a third space. And when we're talking about anti-bias education, the third space is a place where when there's a cultural difference that's kind of causing people to kind of bump up against each other, finding a third space is the place where we find solutions together that nobody would have thought of on their own, but we create because of that rupture invited us to that space.
And Gloria Lindula from Texas, somewhere near the borderland, talks about and she's also a poet and a scholar, but she talks about being I'm not sure if she was first generation USA or second generation, but standing in the borderland and looking into Mexico and being of there, but not being of there, and then looking into what is now the United States and being of there, but not of there. But then there's the border, the borderland, and you're fully held in the borderland because because the borderland is of both. So this is the third space that really resonates with me. I'm also from the borderland of El Paso, Texas, y Ciudad Juárez, Mexico. So a little bit of context for the third space and the way that how it resonates with me.
Well, that resonates very much for me. Also, the border. I feel the border is I'm not on the landscape level, but the border is the space where there's nothing happening. So, for example, the pause is different at the top of inhale from at the finish of the exhale. So the pause at the end of the exhale has that there's nothing here, that there's no judgment, there's no idea, there's no critical thinking. And then you come out of it. And then hopefully you go back into it with regularity so that we don't get too stuck in, the one place that we live. So that we can talk with someone else who lives in another place. And perhaps we can meet in that place, just exactly as you say. We can meet in that place and the overlapping sets, right? The circles they give you and the overlapping sets in fourth grade. I remember those. Circle in the circle. And I loved that space. I always loved in school. I just loved that, wow, they share this space and yet they're also themselves.
The Venn diagram. Yeah, I loved that too. It was cool to see the different, but depending on how many circles there are, the shape that the middle makes, that the overlapping space in the middle makes. Yeah. Yeah. That is interesting to think about. Even the ways Angela and I are dreaming up some Earthship schools. So if anybody's interested about that, you should ask us because we will not stop talking about it, but we don't necessarily need to talk about it now. But even the way that we're thinking about the way that buildings are designed in order to hold people and be a space, maybe that's the third space, Angela, the Earthship schools. But I guess the shape of that matters. And it probably affects how we feel in that space and the way that we feel, right, held, safe to play. Because sometimes, when we think about rough and tumble play with children, it's really important for them. They learn a lot of social skills. They learn self-regulation. But there is a line that gets crossed when they're no longer doing rough and tumble play anymore. And that's when their open hands go to fists, closed to fists, when they're not smiling anymore. And when one kid is always winning. There's that winning again. When there's one kid always winning, it's no longer rough and tumble, supportive of development play anymore. It's fighting. So maybe there's some wisdom for us there, because some of those concepts have come up in our conversation. Think about okay, rough and tumble play is a part of the journey. Discernment is a kind of rough and tumble play where we make space for something else that's not us to come, or the different aspects of ourselves to come into this third space. And once, we might recognize it's not the third space anymore when it feels rigid or like a lack of balance between power or whoever's quote unquote winning, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for naming that. Right, because the earlier I mentioned there's the version of me that could be an asshole, and I try not to be that person, but then all of a sudden that version or those thoughts come, and they're messages of some sort, right? They're messages, and usually that version, in my case, is when there's harm being imposed, when power dynamics are no longer in balance, or now there's something trying to control me or take something from me that is not for giving away. And so it's the intuition of hello, something's not right, something's not right. And then there's like the other versions of us that we sort of like they need to come and go, the versions of us, because they give us messages of how to move forward as we're trying to like get to the next place, or balance us out in a moment of presence to refocus to how do we make the next step for undoing or rebuilding or thriving.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, using that, right. That's such important information that sometimes we just push it away, or we say like, oh, I'm judging again. That's bad. When actually we could listen to that when it comes up and see. Forget how you described it earlier, Patty, but the kind of like, did you say listening or receiving? That's what you said. Receiving that instead of pushing it away might be able to give us a little bit of space in order to say like, well, why is this happening right now? There's something about these conditions that I need to change in order to feel safe to play again or grow again.
Mm-hmm. The thing that we haven't mentioned, I'm sure we're just about finished, but the thing that we haven't mentioned, or probably only one of the things we haven't mentioned here, is the thing about our own boundaries and how important it is to understand our own boundaries, because just because we have a big vision doesn't mean we have to go spilling it all over the place. And also to know how to say no. No. No, Bonnie would always say no is first.
Okay.
No is first. I love that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we don't hear that very much. But that's the pause, right? I mean, even like when I'm thinking about working with children and like they're about to climb on something that I don't think they should climb on. So I might be like, no. But then I might be like, actually, it's okay for them to climb on that thing. I'll just stand next to them when they do it. And then I might say yes after I said no. So I feel like the saying the no is almost like a pause, symbol for a pause.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. For all the early childhood educators out there, thinking about the systems and work responsibilities and we just assume we're in scarcity mindset. We don't have a lot of resources, and we want to do the thing that the children and the families need, but it is okay to say no.
100%.
Right. Yeah.
I'm gonna sit with no is first. It's resonating something like different that I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that thing to happen. So I'm gonna sit with it for a while. It was good. It was very good. Thank you, Bonnie.
Yeah.
And thank you, Patty, for bringing it here.
Yeah, and thank you, Patty, for spending this time with us. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners?
No, I'm very happy to have been sharing with the two of you. This has been lovely. I appreciate the invitation very much, and appreciate your work. Good work.
Thank you.
What you do.
Thank you. And thanks for being my teacher.
You're welcome.
And to the listeners, thanks for listening. To keep the conversation going and for monthly reflection prompts related to each episode, sign up for our mailing list.
If you want to play with us in real time, exploring the ideas in this episode, come to the next campfire chat. We look forward to our next sacred conversation with you.
Check out the show notes for details.